Hello and welcome back to this workshop on the publication of trachoma survey data, run by Tropical Data at the London School of Hygiene and Tropical Medicine. Before we get started, we would like to sincerely thank all of our partners involved in the running of Tropical Data. We would also like to thank everyone involved in the creation of this workshop, which was run in collaboration with the Ethiopian Health Ministry and funded by RTI International and the Fred Hollows Foundation. In this session, we will be covering how to write the discussion section. We will talk about the purpose of the discussion, what we should include according to the Strobe guidelines, and point out some resources which might be of use. First, let's talk about the purpose of the discussion section. The discussion section essentially serves as a critical appraisal of your study. You should consider the following: the relevance of the study, whether you have answered your objectives, what are the strengths of your study, whether there are any limitations, comparing your study with methods and findings of comparable studies, and what you might recommend happen next in terms of the program, future surveys, research, or policy changes. Let us refer to the Strobe guidelines again. The discussion part of the Strobe checklist gives us an idea of what we need to write. Point 18 on the Strobe checklist tells us to summarize the key results with reference to the study objectives. It's important here not to simply repeat the findings from the results section, but to summarize and refer to the objectives of the study. The point prevalence for all EUs is included in the table, so we do not need to repeat that. You can summarize at top level. We found that the prevalence of trachoma is above the target for elimination. TF in 1 to 9-year-olds is greater or equal to 5%, or TT unknown to the health system is greater or equal to 0.2% in the 10 EUs in this region. Moving on to the next part of the Strobe checklist, limitations. You should discuss the limitations of the study and any potential sources of bias. Since tropical data surveys are designed and carried out according to best practices for trachoma surveys, this may seem difficult. However, there are some common limitations that we should cite. For example, we present TT prevalence data, but the survey may not have been designed to do this, and the sample is sometimes not really large enough to estimate this with good precision. Clearly state any perceived limitations and then state whether you took any steps to mitigate this, or whether doing so might have affected your results. This might include change in TT definition partway through the study. This is a problem facing all trachoma programs globally. Change in EU boundaries. These surveys were undertaken to determine what the next steps should be, so it doesn't matter what happened before. Any areas not covered by this exercise, TSS, unmapped areas, survey-specific issues. Thinking about TF trend analysis, how can we explain the relevance and significance of comparing the survey results based on different background areas? GTMP surveys were done in some countries at super district level, or some districts have subsequently been split or restructured into new districts. It is not possible to compare directly between areas that were mapped with different EU boundaries. Make comparisons with extreme caution. Statistical analysis of trends is not possible. We must acknowledge the limitations of any comparison. The purpose of these surveys is to determine what to do next, i.e., what has happened in the past is not really relevant. The same issue arises for TT and TF surveys that are not big enough or statistically powered to compare TT prevalence, and so caution should be taken when discussing these results. What is the recommendation if the TF prevalence remains static following completion of recommended courses of treatment? The guidelines are based on current prevalence, so would be the same whether the previous prevalence was higher, lower, or the same. If you see a continual upward trend, you could suggest research questions to investigate that and engage appropriate partners. How do definitions of trichiasis, TT2, and recurrent TT differ? A. Trichiasis, any lash touching the globe or recently removed interned eyelashes. TT2, a lash from upper lid touching the eyeball. Recurrent TT or post-operative TT. 1. Do you have TT? If yes. 2. Have you had the surgery? Then yes. Which type of analysis is the most important to show the implementation effect of F&E? Wash. components in line with the new WASH NTD roadmap. The intention is to draw the attention of WASH organizations and/or donors. It is not possible to distinguish the relative impact of WASH from the impact of A on the prevalence of TF. All three components of SAFE are intended to drive down TF prevalence. The best way to engage WASH partners is probably to present the data on access to water and sanitation in full, so that they can see the situation is and plan for the future. Where EUs overlap and you have WASH data collected in the same way before and after, you can compare WASH, for example, pre-MDA, GTMP, and post-MDA. Tropical data, and compare the number of households with private latrine. Moving on to the next part of the strobe checklist, interpretation. You should then give a cautious interpretation of your results. In the case of trachoma prevalence surveys, the purpose is to guide interventions, so we should say clearly that interventions are required and where. For example, these EUs need MDA. These EUs need a surveillance survey. These EUs require enhanced case finding for TT, and these EUs should continue implementing the F and E components of the SAFE strategy. At this stage, you can also talk about any secondary points of interest. A. WASH findings. How do the WASH findings compare to regional targets or previous data from the region? B. Note EUs with failure of TIS or TSS. Is research needed into why this might have happened? Are the F and E components being thoroughly implemented? Do we need molecular diagnostics? Are MDA programs meeting coverage targets? And C. Are there any other survey data to which this survey may be compared? Neighboring countries? Other regional data? Moving on now to the next part of the strobe checklist, generalizability. You should comment on the generalizability of your data. For example, A. Prevalence data can't be extrapolated, but in the most recent WHO weekly epidemiological record, 50% of the world's population living in trachoma endemic districts was in Ethiopia. So progress towards elimination in those areas is of general importance and interest to the global program. You should add a concluding statement after this, a short paragraph with the overall message of the paper. Some examples of how this can be done are shown on the slide. Finally, let's talk about resources. You can view past GTMP and tropical data papers and other similar manuscripts for examples on how to write the discussion section. Your suggested task before the next session is to draft the discussion section. Thank you for attending this session, and we hope to see you in the next video session, which will focus on formatting and preparing for publication.